They say winter is just a season, but for some of us, it's everything we don't say out loud. The silence, the empty hallway, the tea that gets cold on the second cup because there's no one across the table to ask, "Want more?" That was Evelyn's world now, and it had never felt so wide or so small. Evelyn Monroe didn't move to the hills of northern Montana for the view, though the view was breathtaking. It stretched wide with low brush, a distant tree line, and sky that seemed to listen. She came because it was quiet. After her husband died in early spring, something in her broke. Not all at once, but like an old quilt unraveling stitch by stitch. Grief didn't roar. It whispered. It rearranged the furniture when she wasn't looking. It made toast taste like nothing and music sound like a ghost walking through her living room. By late October, the little rental house in town started to feel like a cage made of casseroles and polite condolences. People meant well, but meaning well is not the same as knowing when to leave a grieving woman alone and when to pull her back in. So Evelyn packed what she needed, some worn clothes, a few books she didn't plan to read, a flannel quilt stitched by her mother before memory got the better of her, and drove north. Way past the blinking town limits, past the old mill down the gravel road that led to a place where nobody knew her as his wife. Just Evelyn. The cabin was part of an old ranger station once used by the Forestry Service. It was sturdy, but weathered like her. The porch tilted a bit. The windows breathed when the wind blew. And in the evenings, the light through the pine slats painted soft gold stripes across the walls like a kind of grace. But none of that changed the fact that she was for the first time in 38 years utterly alone. It wasn't just the kind of alone you can explain on paper. It was the kind that sat with you during supper, that stared back from the mirror when you brushed your hair and wondered why. The kind that crept up around the seams of a day and asked softly, what now? Evelyn wasn't trying to reinvent her life. She wasn't looking for a fresh start or some romantic second act. She wanted something quieter than that. She wanted to remember how to be without breaking. And in a way, that's what the winter gave her. Not peace, but stillness. Each morning, Evelyn made the same pot of black tea. Just one cup now. She'd still reach for the second mug, sometimes the one with the faded elk print her husband used, and then stop short. Leave it on the shelf. She swept the porch even when there was no snow. Refilled the bird feeder with sunflower seeds. Left an old wool blanket out on the bench for the red squirrel who'd built a nest near the steps. Some days, that's all she did. And that was enough. It was during one of those quiet mornings, mid-November light snow falling without sound, that she noticed it. Paw prints. Leading up from the edge of the tree line. Small oval deep, not dog, not deer, not raccoon. Something else. She followed them halfway around the house and saw where they stopped, right at the edge of the back porch, as if something had come, watched, and then gone. She didn't say anything aloud, just paused, listened, waited. It came again 2 days later. A little closer, then again, then again. Always dusk, always silent. Evelyn didn't scare easy, but this felt different. Not threatening, just strange. Like a secret knocking once and waiting to see if you'd answer. She didn't tell anyone about the prince. There was no one to tell. But inside she felt something she hadn't in a while. Curiosity. Not excitement, not joy. Just a reason to open the door a little more carefully. To look out with a steadier gaze. For weeks, her emotions had been like furniture, draped in old sheets covered untouched, collecting dust. But now, there was movement. A nudge, like something calling her back. Not into the world exactly, but into herself. Because maybe, just maybe, there was still something wild and alive in her too. When you lose someone after decades, the world doesn't ask if you want to begin again. It just keeps going. And people expect you to eventually join back in. But Evelyn didn't want to rejoin. She didn't want to be part of something she no longer recognized. What she wanted was simpler. To find one thing that still made sense. A sound, a pattern, a rhythm, Something that wasn't about healing or fixing, just noticing. And somehow, that's what this small creature was giving her. A reason to notice again. A set of paw prints in the snow. Reminded her that even grief leaves tracks. That it moves. That it doesn't sit forever in the same place. If you've ever spent a winter inside yourself, you'll understand this part. The part where nothing happens, but everything shifts. Wind stirring a curtain in soft light. The worn wood floor, a steaming mug untouched. Outside the window, just barely a figure moves among the trees. The camera doesn't follow it, just lets it exist. One night, as snow began to fall and the wind pushed gently against the eaves, Evelyn left a bowl of chicken scraps at the base of the back steps. She didn't expect anything, but come morning the bowl was empty, and beside it, half sunken in the snow, was a new track. Clearer now, closer. And for the first time in weeks, she said something aloud. Just a whisper, but firm. Okay then. She wasn't sure what she was agreeing to, but it was a start. And sometimes, that's all we're waiting for. When the eyes finally appeared in the dark, low yellow unblinking, Evelyn didn't run. She sat on the steps, heart beating louder than the wind, and said softly, "You can come closer if you want. Some things don't knock at the door. They wait at the edge of the woods. Quiet. Watching. And if you're still enough broken just right, they come a little closer. Not because they trust you, but because they see you for what you are. Something wild, something wounded, something kind." The wind had softened that evening, the kind of calm that made you forget winter could still bite. Evelyn sat on the back steps wrapped in a thick cardigan, hands tucked into her sleeves. The porch light was off. She'd stopped turning it on. Somehow, darkness felt gentler when it wasn't being fought. She sipped warm tea and listened. The old trees creaked. A single owl called from somewhere near the ridge, and beneath it all there was breathing. Not hers. Something else. Then she saw them. Two small eyes low to the ground. Pale yellow, steady, watching her from the tree line. Not glowing like in the movies, not menacing, just there, like someone who wasn't sure if they were welcome but had nowhere else to go. For nearly 2 weeks, Evelyn had been leaving scraps of food at the edge of the porch, carefully, quietly, never at the same time, each day. Not because she wanted to tame anything, but because she understood what it meant to be hungry and unseen. She didn't know exactly what it was at first. The tracks were faint, shallow, brushed over by snow. Could have been a stray dog, maybe a coyote. But then she found a tuft of fur near the shed, short, tawny, dense, not like a house cat's. She looked it up in an old guidebook from the cabin shelf. Bobcat, Lynx rufus, a solitary hunter. Silent, fierce, untrusting by nature. Some called them dangerous, some called them ghosts. Evelyn didn't call it anything, not yet. She just kept showing up. The first real encounter came on the 7th night. She had set out a bowl of warm chicken broth and sat 5 feet away. Her body still, her breathing slow. She didn't look directly at the animal, just kept her gaze low, her voice lower. "You can eat," she whispered. "I'm not going anywhere." And after long minutes of silence, so still the snow didn't dare fall, the animal moved. It didn't creep or slink. It walked. Cautiously, yes, but with a strange dignity. Thin bones pressing against its frame, a limp in one leg, the fur on its left flank matted and gray with dirt. It paused near the bowl, glanced at her once, and began to eat. Not ravenous. Measured. As if it knew that accepting help was its most vulnerable act. Evelyn didn't cry that night, though she thought she might. Instead, she felt something loosen in her chest. This wasn't a miracle. It wasn't a sign. It was something quieter, a kind of holy silence. The moment you realize you're not the only thing in the world trying to survive gently. The bobcat didn't purr, didn't linger. When it finished, it looked up at her, blinked once slowly, and walked back into the dark. And Evelyn just sat there holding an empty mug and a full heart. Some folks might have been scared. A bobcat that close to the house injured wild. They'd call someone, set traps, draw hard lines between human and animal. But Evelyn didn't see danger. She saw kinship, not in the usual way, no poetic fables about spirit animals or fairy tale rescues. Just this, two creatures worn down by weather and time still choosing to show up anyway. Still choosing to eat, to wait, to not give up entirely. In a world that praises loud, healing, instant solutions and silver linings, there was something deeply honest about just being with something that made no promises, that didn't owe her anything, and yet came back. If you've ever fed something not to tame it, but to understand it, you know this kind of love. It doesn't ask for proof. It just waits at the tree line. Camera low to the snow, the soft crunch of footsteps, a bowl of steam rising into the cold air, a blur of fur at the edge of the frame. Not front and center, never centered, but there. Real. That night, Evelyn wrote the word kindness in the dust on her kitchen table with one finger, not as a reminder, but as a record. Love, she was learning, wasn't always loud. Sometimes it came in the form of bone-thin paws and cautious glances. Sometimes it looked like a heart learning how to trust again. And sometimes it looked like a bobcat, starving, limping, beautiful, eating quietly under a sky full of stars. The next morning, she did something she hadn't done in months. She spoke out loud in the kitchen, even though no one was there. I think I'm going to call her Marigold. Not because she needed to name the bobcat, but because naming something meant she expected it to return. As the days grew shorter and snow deepened, Marigold came closer. Not every night, not for long, but enough. Enough for Evelyn to believe that trust isn't something you demand. It's something you earn, one quiet evening at a time. Some promises aren't spoken. They settle into the space between two breathing things. No contracts, no conditions, just presence. And a quiet understanding I'll stay. If you do too. The days folded into one another like soft, worn flannel. Outside, the snow deepened. Trees bowed under the weight of their own silence. The wind came often now, not violent, just constant. It moaned against the window panes like an old memory trying to get in. And still Marigold came. Not every night, not on a schedule. Sometimes just footprints the next morning. Sometimes a shadow near the woodpile. Sometimes on the coldest nights, she would curl under the porch light, close enough to see, but far enough to flee if needed. Evelyn never called out. She didn't coax, didn't bribe with more food. She just showed up. And it became a rhythm. Not routine. Rhythm. One beat at a time. There's a difference between taming and trusting. Evelyn had no interest in changing Marigold. She didn't dream of her curled up on the hearth or jumping into her lap like a pet. That wasn't the story here. This was a story of coexistence. Of two creatures, one wild, one weary, learning to share space without asking too much of each other. Evelyn left small bowls of water at the edge of the porch, tucked raw bits of meat in the notch of an old cedar stump nearby. She never touched Marigold, never even reached out, but she spoke, softly, always gently. "Good morning, girl," or "Storm's coming, you stay warm." Marigold never answered, of course. But sometimes her ears turned toward Evelyn's voice, and in that there was more conversation than some people ever manage. One morning, Evelyn found a paw print on the front steps. Not by the bowl, not by the food, but by the chair. Her chair. It was faint, pressed into a dusting of snow, as if Marigold had climbed the steps not to beg, but to be closer. That same day, Evelyn brought out her old rocking chair and set it on the porch beside the usual spot. Not facing the door, not toward the woods, but side by side, facing the yard, the trees, the open. She sat there every morning after. No expectation, just company, and more often than not, Marigold would return. Lying a few feet away, body curled tight to tail wrapped over her nose. Together they sat. Sometimes for minutes, sometimes for an hour, not looking at each other, looking out. There's something sacred about being seen but not stared at, about being near someone who doesn't try to fix you. Evelyn hadn't had that in a long time. Even in the best years of her marriage, there had been a kind of busyness to love. Chores to share, plans to make, words to say. But here with Marigold, there were no checklists. No need to explain why the grief still hovered, why the silence didn't scare her, why the tears came sometimes without warning. There was only the snow, the sky, the breath of two living beings rising and falling together. And it was enough. We often think healing comes with signs. A breakthrough, a bold moment, a miracle. But maybe healing looks more like this. A woman placing a bowl down in the cold, a wild bobcat choosing to return. Two survivors, one with memories, one with instincts, agreeing silently to not give up on the world just yet. This wasn't a rescue. This was a reunion, not of two who knew each other before, but of two who understood something deeper. That love doesn't always wear a face you expect, and comfort doesn't always come in human form. If you've ever found peace sitting beside someone without saying a word, you already understand this chapter. A wide porch under overcast light. Two figures, woman in a rocking chair, bobcat curled nearby. No eye contact, no motion, just stillness. Steam rising from a mug. The faint sound of wind brushing pine needles. That afternoon, Evelyn pulled out an old field notebook. Pages yellowed, spine cracked. She wrote a single sentence, "Kindness isn't what you give, it's what you don't take." Then she closed it, placed it back on the shelf. Because some things only need to be said once. And some stories, like the one unfolding between her and the bobcat, were best written in small, invisible ways. In loyalty without leash, in soulful silence, in the quiet rebuilding of trust. Winter deepened. The snow thickened. One night the wind howled so hard the shutters rattled and the chimney moaned. Evelyn looked out into the dark, worried. Marigold hadn't come that evening. She left the porch light off anyway, placed the bowl, sat for a while in the rocking chair, hands wrapped around her knees. Just before she stood to go inside, a soft shape moved at the edge of the woods. Limping, tired, and bleeding, Marigold had returned, but not as before. There was pain now visible raw, and Evelyn would face the hardest question of all. Do I help? Even if I'm not asked, even if it risks everything. There's a moment when you see something wild in pain, where time feels like it holds its breath, not because you don't know what to do, but because you do. And it will cost you. The storm had passed in the early hours. It wasn't a violent storm, just heavy. Thick snow clung to the eaves and curled along the porch like sleeping animals. The air outside was hushed, like the world hadn't fully woken up yet. Evelyn stepped onto the back deck with a bowl in one hand and a wool scarf wrapped twice around her neck. She didn't expect Marigold to show. Not after a night like that, but just beyond the steps, barely visible in the pale blue of morning, something shifted. A shape, low, slow, shaking. Marigold. Her left hind leg dragged slightly, leaving a streak in the snow. Her head hung lower than usual. Her coat, once patchy but proud, was now darkened with dried blood near the ribs. She was hurt, badly, and Evelyn's body reacted before her mind caught up. The bowl hit the porch with a dull thud. She whispered, "Oh no," and took one step down, then froze. Because Marigold's eyes, usually calm and watchful, had turned wild again. Not angry, just scared. Pain does that. It peels back layers. It reminds even the gentlest animal that survival means suspicion. Even the smallest kindness can feel like a threat when you're bleeding. Evelyn didn't move closer. Instead, she lowered herself to the cold wooden step, sat quietly, palms open, eyes soft. She knew what it was to want help, but fear what it might cost. How many times had she done this dance herself when her husband was sick and people offered casseroles she didn't ask for, advice she didn't want? All she'd needed then was someone to stay, without fixing, without judgment. So she stayed, and she waited. And when Marigold finally collapsed into the snow ribs, heaving head down, Evelyn began to whisper. "I'm here," she said. "No sudden moves. You don't owe me anything." The The words felt strange in the air, like she wasn't speaking to the bobcat at all, but to something older, deeper still, tender in her own bones. She rose slowly and walked back inside, heart pounding, not with fear, but with something more fragile, urgency without certainty. She gathered what she had: a faded flannel sheet, a pair of garden gloves, the small first aid kit from under the sink. It wasn't much. She hadn't expected to need it. When she returned, Marigold hadn't moved. Evelyn stood a moment, let her breath cloud the air between them. Then she knelt 3 feet away and waited again. It took a long time. Long enough for her knees to ache from the cold. Long enough for the birds to return to the feeder and flutter away again. But eventually Marigold lifted her head, blinked once, and didn't run. That was permission enough. Helping someone who hasn't asked to be helped is a sacred kind of risk, because you can do everything right and still lose them. Evelyn knew this. She'd tried once to reach her son in his worst season, when his life was unraveling and his voice grew sharp and tired. She had spoken gently, sent letters, left voicemails that said, "Just checking in, no pressure." But sometimes love isn't enough, not when the pain is louder. He'd slipped away anyway. That kind of loss doesn't just fade, it echoes. And now, kneeling beside an injured bobcat, Evelyn felt the same ache rise. Please don't run, she thought. Please let me stay this time. Her fingers trembled as she reached forward. Flannel first, never skin. She draped the cloth over Marigold's flank, and the bobcat flinched, growled, but didn't bite. Instead, she let Evelyn touch her side just long enough to find the wound. A jagged tear, not deep enough to be fatal, but raw. Maybe from a fence, maybe a fight. Either way, it needed cleaning. Evelyn didn't speak again. She just worked slowly, softly, as if each dab of water was a prayer. There's a quiet kind of courage in caring for something that may still leave you. No guarantee of gratitude. No neat, tidy ending. Just this moment. Just this need. And your hands tired, clumsy, full of kindness anyway. We're told to be cautious, to draw lines, to protect ourselves from things that might not stay. But Evelyn had learned, sometimes love means offering, not keeping. It means opening the door even if they only ever come to the porch. It means dressing a wound, knowing the animal may never return, and choosing to do it anyway. If you've ever helped someone who never said thank you and still would do it again, then you already know the strength in Evelyn's hands. Close-up of snow melting around the warmth of a quiet body. Hands in garden gloves dabbing blood away from fur. A flannel cloth half unfolded in the wind. The bobcat's side rising, falling. Evelyn's face out of frame, only her breath seen in the cold. As she worked, Evelyn murmured under her breath, not words exactly, just sounds, soothing low, almost a hum. The kind of sound you make when rocking a child or holding the edge of grief. Something soulful, old as time. Not rehearsed, not perfect, just honest. That night she lit a candle near the back window, watched the flame flicker, held her tea tighter. Marigold was gone again. Slipped away sometime in the afternoon. And Evelyn didn't know if she'd return, but she'd left the flannel outside. And a second bowl, just in case. Because healing isn't about guarantees. It's about readiness. The kind of readiness that says, I'm here, if you need me, even if you don't stay. For 4 days, the yard stayed empty. No prints in the snow, no sounds under the porch. And Evelyn tried not to let the silence undo her. But on the 5th morning, just before sunrise, a shape moved through the trees. Slower than before, but upright, steady. And this time she didn't stay outside. This time, Marigold came to the door. It was just a single step. One paw onto the wood floor, but to Evelyn, it felt like the whole world had leaned forward and whispered, "You've been chosen, not as a rescuer, but as someone safe." It wasn't a leap, not even a stride. Just one careful paw pressed onto old wooden floorboards. But some steps, however small, carry the weight of years. And when Marigold crossed that line, Evelyn felt something shift in the bones of the house. And in her own heart. The mornings were softer now. Still cold, still brittle with frost, but something had changed in the rhythm of the days. It wasn't warmth exactly, it was possibility. Like the air had loosened its grip. Evelyn had started keeping the back door cracked open just an inch or two. Not to coax, not to invite, just to offer. The flannel remained on the porch, a second one freshly laid. The food was set inside now, just past the doorframe. She'd moved it there without ceremony, without expectation, and for a while, that's where it stayed, untouched. Until one dusky evening, right as the sun dipped behind the ridge, Evelyn saw her. Marigold, closer than ever before. No limp now, but careful, head low, eyes steady. And when she reached the open door, she didn't hesitate. She paused, and then stepped in. Just the front pause, then the back, and Evelyn forgot to breathe. It wasn't about the room, or the shelter. For Marigold, the house meant nothing, but the threshold that was something else entirely. Crossing that line wasn't instinct, it wasn't hunger, it was decision. Wild creatures don't walk into homes, they survive in spite of them. But on that quiet evening, something in the bobcat said, "This space is safe. This person does not want to own me." That mattered more than anything. Evelyn didn't move, not even a twitch. She sat in her usual chair, a mug of warm tea in her hands, now gone cold. The lamp beside her was turned low, casting just enough light to see without harshness. Marigold stood in the doorway for a long while. Her nose lifted once, twice. Then she stepped forward, 2 feet onto the braided rug. Her body crouched low, but not frightened, ready to flee, not fight. And then, as if some ancient part of her decided this is enough, she lay down, not fully relaxed, but resting. Inside the home of a woman who had once thought herself forgotten. Inside the quiet, warm room where grief had lived too long alone. It was the first time since Evelyn's husband had passed that another living being had chosen to lie still under her roof. She whispered, "Thank you not to the bobcat, to whatever part of the universe had allowed it." Trust is a quiet builder. It doesn't arrive in declarations. It doesn't come from pleading. It's carved slowly, gesture by gesture, presence by presence, until one day, it's simply there, like the shape of a mountain revealed after a long fog, like breath returning to a body you thought was done hoping. Evelyn didn't need Marigold to stay. She didn't need her to come closer. She just needed this moment, this pause in the stillness, this small act of chosen nearness, and it broke her softly, beautifully. Because when you've lost everything familiar, and something unfamiliar walks in without fear, you remember who you were before the world went quiet. People often talk about rescue as a one-way street. You save the animal, you fix the wound, you provide the food. But Evelyn had begun to see things differently. Marigold didn't come to be rescued. She came as a mirror, a reminder that we are all human-animal grieving or surviving, just looking for a safe place to rest our eyes. A place where no one asks us to change. A place where love doesn't chase us, but waits with the door open. And maybe that's the real lesson of this kind of story. Not that Evelyn saved a bobcat, but that the bobcat let her. If you've ever left the door open, just in case something or someone needed to come in, you already know this kind of trust. A dim room lit by a single lamp. The bobcat lying on a braided rug. Evelyn in her chair, hands wrapped around a chipped mug, eyes wide but peaceful. Outside, snow drifting quietly past the porch. No music, just the crackle of fire. The sound of 2 heartbeats in the same space. Evelyn sat long after Marigold left. She didn't follow, didn't peek through the window, just sat there in the warmth, tears resting on her cheeks like something sacred. She felt it then, that soulful ache that comes not from sadness, but from recognition. That love, real love, doesn't always speak. Sometimes it just steps gently across the threshold, leaves behind a trace of loyalty, of kindness, of presence, and disappears again into the dark, knowing it will be welcomed if it ever returns. That night, Evelyn slept with the back door still ajar. just an inch, not out of hope, not out of habit, but because for the first time in a long while, she felt less like a woman holding grief and more like a woman holding space. And when morning came, the rug still bore faint paw prints, and the food bowl was empty. But something else had been left behind, something Evelyn couldn't name, only feel. It came without warning. A gesture so small, so quiet. Evelyn didn't even see it at first. But when she did, she cried, not out of sorrow, but because she knew she hadn't been forgotten. It wasn't wrapped in ribbon. It didn't sparkle. It didn't even look like a gift at first. But what Marigold left behind was more than an offering. It was a message, a quiet, fierce kind of love. And when Evelyn saw it, she wept in a way she hadn't in years. There are mornings that begin like any other soft, light kettle, warming a slow stretch of breath before the day speaks. And then there are mornings that rearrange something inside you without warning. It was late February. The snow had thinned, crisping at the edges. The trees, though bare, seemed to be listening. And Evelyn had started humming again, just little tunes, half-remembered lullabies. She didn't even notice she was doing it. That morning, she opened the back door, like always expecting the quiet. Maybe paw prints, maybe not. But there, right in the center of the welcome mat, was something she hadn't seen before. A small bone-white object. Clean, delicate, placed with intention. A gift. In the wild, bobcats don't offer tokens of gratitude. They're not domesticated. They don't do sentiment, but they do understand territory. Intuition, connection. What Evelyn found wasn't just some leftover from a meal. It was too carefully positioned. No mess, no signs of a scuffle. It was a bird bone light as ash, the kind you'd miss if you weren't looking. Marigold had placed it there, directly, silently, and left. Evelyn crouched slowly, her hand hovering above it, not quite ready to touch. Something about it felt sacred, not precious like gold, precious like trust. She didn't pick it up, not at first. Instead, she sat down beside it, legs folded, palms on her knees like in prayer. The air was still, not just outside, but inside her. For months, Evelyn had given, quietly, without asking for anything in return. A bowl of food, a soft place to sleep, her presence, her warmth, her patience, and now in return, this, a small bone left without flourish. But Evelyn understood. It wasn't thanks. It was recognition. Marigold had seen her. Not just the porch, not just the hand that offered, but the person behind the kindness, the grief, the strength. The bone wasn't the point. The placement was. Evelyn's tears came slowly, just one at first, then another, then too many to count. She didn't cry because of the gift itself. She cried because it meant something had changed. In the stillness of those weeks, her life had begun to breathe again, not loudly, not suddenly, but like a garden thawing beneath the snow. The bone on the mat wasn't a trophy. It wasn't a debt repaid. It was a wordless whisper. I see you. I trust you. I came back. And to a woman who had lost more than she could ever speak aloud, those words, even unspoken, were everything. There's a story we tell ourselves about love that it has to be explained, declared, framed in words and wrapped in moments we can photograph. But sometimes the deepest love doesn't announce itself. Sometimes it looks like a gesture made in the dark. Left behind without certainty, it'll even be noticed. And sometimes that's the love that changes us most. Because it doesn't chase, it doesn't beg. It simply chooses you. Again and again, without needing anything in return. If someone or something has ever chosen you quietly, without asking you to be anything more than who you are, you've already received this kind of gift. A pale morning, close-up of a small bone on a woven mat. Evelyn's hands still resting beside it. Her face not fully shown, just her breath, her shoulders rising with emotion. The wind brushing snow off the trees behind her. Silent. Still. Holy. Later that day, Evelyn brought the bone inside. She didn't clean it, didn't polish it. She just placed it on the mantel on a small square of fabric right beside an old photo of her husband. And in that gesture, the house felt lighter, not happier, not healed, but held. Because in that fragile ivory sliver of bone, she saw more than kindness. She saw loyalty, emotions that didn't need names, a moral story unfolding without a single spoken line. It reminded her of the fairy tales she once read aloud to classrooms full of second graders. Except this one was real. And it hadn't ended. That night, Evelyn dreamed of the hills. She was standing in tall grass, barefoot. The sky was wide, the color of calm. Marigold walked beside her, not ahead, not behind, just beside. And when Evelyn reached out, her fingers brushed fur and didn't wake. In the morning, the dream clung to her like warmth from a fire. And when she opened the door, Marigold was there again. Not at the mat this time, but at the window, watching. And for the first time, Evelyn opened it, wide, and said, "You're home if you want to be. Snow melts, the earth softens." And with it, so does Evelyn. But when the rhythms change and Marigold begins to come less often, Evelyn must learn that even love with an open door must let things go, to bloom again. Love doesn't always settle in to stay. Sometimes it drifts in like birdsong through a window. Sometimes it leaves before you're ready. But if you're quiet enough, if you've learned to open, not clutch, you might find that letting go is the most loyal thing you'll ever do. The thaw came quietly. It didn't crash in with sun and birdsong like in the movies. It came like everything else had, softly, slowly. A drip from the eaves, a patch of earth beneath the pines turning dark with melt. Evelyn noticed the first sprigs of green one morning in March, tiny shoots near the garden bed that had gone untouched for nearly a year. And without fully deciding, she knelt beside them, pulled a few weeds, pressed her fingers into the dirt, closed her eyes. It was the first time she'd touched soil since her husband's funeral. Not to plant, just to feel something come alive again. Spring doesn't fix grief, but it does interrupt it. It breaks up the rhythm of loss with small, persistent signs that the world still wants to grow. The songbirds came back. The mornings grew longer. And Marigold, she came less often. At first, Evelyn thought it was the weather. Warmer air, easier hunting. She told herself not to worry, that the wild belonged to no one, that love in its truest form does not bind. But each day the rug stayed undisturbed, each morning the bowl untouched. She felt it again, that ache. Not the sharp stab of new grief, but the echo of it, like someone you once loved still walking the same town, just never down your street. One morning Evelyn stepped out to the porch and found the second bowl her backup turned over on its side. No food left, no paw prints, just a light smear in the dirt, a trace. Marigold had come and gone. She hadn't lingered, she hadn't stayed. And Evelyn sat down in the rocker, pulled her cardigan tight and whispered, "Thank you anyway." Later that day, she found herself in the small clearing near the shed, clearing out the space that had once been a wildflower patch. Not because she thought Marigold would return, but because she was ready to make room again. There's a kind of sorrow that's gentle, the kind that doesn't knock you over but stays with you in the corners of a quiet day. That was the kind of sorrow Evelyn felt now. And strangely, it didn't hurt, not in the way she feared it would, because she had seen love in its purest form, free, untamed, unpromised, and she'd been part of it, even for a season. The bobcat didn't belong to her, but for a time, she had trusted Evelyn enough to stay. And now Evelyn trusted her enough to let go. Letting go is often painted as defeat, as if keeping something close is proof that it mattered. But Evelyn saw things differently now. Sometimes holding too tightly dishonors the very thing you cherish. Sometimes loyalty isn't about keeping, it's about not asking to be kept. That was what Marigold had taught her. To open the door and then to leave it open, even if no one walks through it again. Because love isn't what stays. Love is what chooses. And Evelyn had been chosen. If something wild has ever trusted you for even a moment, a person, a memory, you know what it means to be chosen, even if it doesn't last. Sunlight spilling through sheer curtains, hands pressing seeds into soil, an empty bowl on the porch clean and still, the rocking chair slowly moving in a breeze, and a wide field beyond open and green. The garden came back faster than expected. Bright patches of wild marigold daisies and bluebells began to dot the yard like small bursts of hope. Evelyn tended it daily now. Not like before, not to control or perfect, but to nurture, to be present. She would speak softly as she worked, sometimes to the flowers, sometimes to herself, sometimes to Marigold, just in case. And one afternoon, as she planted a row of lavender near the porch, a child's voice rang out across the yard. "Miss Evelyn, is that for the bobcat?" She turned. It was Ellie, one of the neighbor girls, maybe 7 or 8. A quiet child who watched more than she spoke. Evelyn smiled gently. "No, sweetheart," she said. "It's for all of us." And maybe that was the truth. Maybe kindness, real kindness, is never just for one. Maybe it's what we leave in the ground for whoever comes next. That evening, as the sun folded itself into the hills, Evelyn stood on the porch, watching the light change. She reached for the old flannel blanket and wrapped it around her shoulders, even though the air was warm. She looked out toward the woods, not expecting anything. But something flickered, just for a second. Not a shape, not a sound, but a feeling, as if something had paused right at the edge of the trees and turned back for one last look. And Evelyn didn't move. She just whispered, "It's okay. You go on now," and turned to go inside. A year will pass. The garden will bloom, then fall, then bloom again. And Evelyn will find herself standing in the same field, but she will not be the same woman. Because when love teaches you to stay, and also how to let go, you carry that forever. Even if it only came on 4 quiet paws. Some stories don't end with doors closing. They end with someone standing quietly in a field, remembering what it meant to be chosen. Not because they were perfect, but because they were patient and kind. It had been a year since that first winter. A year since the paw prints in the snow, since the frightened eyes at the edge of the trees, since Evelyn had whispered into the dusk, "You don't owe me anything." Seasons had turned as they always do. Spring came with soft green shoots. Summer hummed with bees and children's laughter. Autumn brushed gold across the fields. And then once again, winter pressed its palm against the windows. But everything was different now. Not because of some grand event, not because Marigold stayed, but because Evelyn had stayed. You see, the most remarkable thing about Evelyn's story isn't that she rescued a starving bobcat. It's that she allowed the bobcat to change her, not into someone else, not into someone stronger or braver or wiser, but into someone softer, someone more willing to be present without needing to fix, to hold, or to define. Marigold never became a pet. She never curled up at Evelyn's feet or stayed through the storms. But she returned, from time to time, a shadow through tall grass, a shape near the tree line, a flicker at the edge of the porch long after the sun had slipped below the hills. And every time Evelyn simply opened the door and waited. Sometimes Marigold stepped in, sometimes not. But that wasn't the point anymore, because love had changed shape. One morning in early June, Evelyn woke before the birds. Not from a dream, not from worry. She simply felt cold. She brewed her tea, wrapped a light shawl over her shoulders, and walked barefoot across the dewy yard. Past the wildflowers she'd planted, past the stones she'd painted with the neighbor children's names. To the meadow. The same meadow where she had first followed those faint paw prints all those months ago. The grass was tall now, dotted with golden marigolds and soft blue cornflowers. The air smelled like memory clean, still laced with the scent of lavender and distant pine. She stood in the middle, hands open at her sides, and looked to the tree line. No movement, no sound, but she didn't feel alone. Not anymore. What Evelyn had learned that most of us forget is that belonging doesn't always mean staying in the same place. It means being seen fully once and never forgetting it. It means learning to trust without demand, to love without ownership, to give without needing repayment. The truth is, kindness doesn't promise permanence, but it plants something deep, something soulful, like a seed that waits all winter in frozen ground. Not because it's weak, but because it knows spring will come. Evelyn had become that kind of ground, not needing, just ready. So often we look for stories with clean arcs, with neat resolutions, with the animal rescued, healed, and tucked safely at the foot of a warm bed. But real life is messier, more sacred because of it. Sometimes the most healing thing isn't a rescue, it's recognition. Not saving the wild, but respecting it. Not taming what's broken, but being with it while it mends itself. Evelyn didn't just give Marigold a second chance. She gave herself one. To believe again, to feel again, to hope quietly, fully, without expectation, and in that hope something wild bloomed again in her life. Not just flowers, but trust and peace and presence. The world is full of noise, of urgency, of things demanding to be fixed or solved or shared. But sometimes what we need, what we're truly longing for, is stillness. A reason to sit on the porch in silence. A reminder that kindness can be quiet, that loyalty doesn't always wear a leash, and that love, real earthy untamed love, might come on 4 cautious paws, then leave behind something that changes you forever. Evelyn still walks the meadow, still sets out a bowl sometimes. Not because she's waiting, but because she remembers. Because that's what a good heart does. It remembers. Maybe you've had your own Marigold. Maybe not a bobcat, but a creature, a person, a moment, that entered your life quietly, asked nothing, and still left you forever changed. If this story stirred something in you, a memory, a longing, a soft ache you didn't know you still carried, then maybe take a breath right now. Let it sit with you, and when you're ready, share that feeling in the comments. Tell us about your Marigold, or your meadow, or that moment you knew you'd been chosen, if only for a while. If this story gave you comfort or reminded you of something beautiful, we invite you to like this video, subscribe to the channel, and be part of a community that values slow, soulful, meaningful stories. Stories of second chances, quiet, loyalty, and the kind of love that lingers long after the screen fades. And if you'd like to go one step further, tap the Super Thanks button below or donate to help rescue and heal wild animals, like Marigold creatures who live on the edges, often unseen, but deeply worthy of care and protection. Together, we can create a little more space in the world for what's untamed and still tender. Until next time, keep your heart open and your door just slightly ajar. You never know who might come home.